All right, so my name's Zachary. I'm the programs coordinator here at the Northeast Harbor Library. We're able to do free programs like this year-round thanks to our donors and thanks to our educators, authors, collaborators like the Farnsworth Art Museum. Speaking of, next week, Monday, August 3rd, we have Caroline Cotter. She's an internationally touring musician. We're having her for a free concert here. And then on Wednesday, August 5th, former town manager Derlin Lunt is coming to give a history presentation titled Otter Creek's Lost Waterfront. So as you can see, these events fill up pretty quick. I highly encourage registering for anything you're interested in, and I hope to see you there. Now for tonight's program, here to introduce our speaker, please welcome the Farnsworth Art Museum's Chief Advancement Officer, Rowan Moody.
Thank you, Zach, and I'll keep it brief since we're all here to learn about By Design, the Worlds of Betsy James Wyeth. Again, I'm Rowan Moody. I'm the Chief Advancement Officer at the Farnsworth Art Museum, and it's lovely to be up here on Mount Desert Island and with all of you. The Farnsworth wants to come every year to visit everyone up here in MDI, and we're really grateful that you all came out for this program. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce the director of the Wyeth Study Center. He works with the Wyeth Study Center. He also works with the Farnsworth and the Brandywine, Dr. William L. Coleman, and he will tell us more about By Design, the Worlds of Betsy James Wyeth. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for spending a bit of your hopefully lovely summer getaway with me. We will tie it all back to the beautiful coast of Maine, and it's been nice to get to know this different landscape a bit today, but I will be taking you eventually to the working waterfront of Muscongas Bay and this other Maine landscape that comes to be really important to this person. So let me give you a bit of context to start. I speak to you from the start of a new era in which the Wyeth Foundation for American Art has entrusted our wonderful Farnsworth Art Museum down in Rockland, as well as the Brandywine down in Pennsylvania, with this amazing collection, 7,000 works of art, but also the archive, photography, documents, letters, so much behind the scenes that are rarely seen by the public, that have given us fascinating insights into an untold story. The story of Andrew Wyeth's quiet partner, the person who made it all possible. As you will see, the person who in no small part defined what an Andrew Wyeth painting looks like. It's a really fascinating and a timely story that is difficult to overstate the nature of her contribution. One of the ways in which that contribution becomes most visible, in addition to being the manager, curator, archivist, businesswoman, is in quite directly shaping the worlds, the subjects that Andrew Wyeth inhabits and paints. And the masterpiece of her work is not so far away from here, and we'll come back there when we conclude. I want to situate this whole project, which has been really rewarding to be a part of, this exhibition and book, By Design, the Worlds of Betsy James Wyeth. This has been a collaboration between Farnsworth, the Brandywine Museum of Art in Pennsylvania, the Colby College Museum of Art, and it will also travel to the Telfair Museums in Savannah, Georgia. It's an unusual structure in which we are simultaneous and multi-sited. Each of these three originating museums dives deep on certain of the sites, the designed environments of Betsy James Wyeth. And the structure of my remarks for today will be taking you through these one by one and starting to define the constituent components of a Betsy Wyeth environment. As we go, I will also share some iconic Andrew Wyeth paintings. Don't worry if that Wyeth name is what brought you in. You will also see some of the things you may know already, but I hope by the end you will understand there was this powerful creative partnership operating behind the scenes of those iconic temperas and watercolors all along. I mentioned the book, and I wanted to put that on screen just for a moment. We're really proud of this big, complicated project with something like 25 authors, longer essays from the curators and the wonderful writer David Michaelis, who wrote a lengthy piece about Betsy Wyeth as he knew her, and then short contributions from many insiders and experts, the caretakers of her properties, an archaeologist, an architect, all these facets of a really complicated life. So I hope you'll check that out. It ends up being very readable and engaging as we write the first draft of this history, a story that really has not been told, and we hope that we'll make it a little easier for that future grad student to dive deep on a part of this really complicated and fascinating story. So let me just give you a visual reference to begin. You're going to be getting to know all three of these sites better by the end of our time together. I'll proceed in chronological order. And these are not the only things this fascinating person designed and made, but these are the major ones. Lower left, Brinton's Mill, Chadsford, Pennsylvania. A largely ruined 18th and 19th century industrial site when she got started, transforms it into a very subtle case study of adaptive reuse that would like nothing more than for you to think that it was always that way. Very subtle, removes herself from the picture, and I'll try to help you to read her touches against the grain. Southern Island, now better associated with her son, Jamie Wyeth, just off Tennant's Harbor. He's there right now. It has been transformed further since Betsy Wyeth's lifetime, but a lighthouse and fog bell tower that come to have some very fascinating and personal touches along the way. And then the masterpiece, Allen and Benner Islands, 5 miles out to sea. I saw a Colby sweatshirt somewhere. This is now Colby College's island campus, and they're doing a really good job of stewarding it. We're keeping a close eye on those folks, and as it is now used for scientific research and student island fellows, they've done a really good job of keeping it up, just as Betsy Wyeth would have wanted it. This place did not look like this when Betsy Wyeth got started. We've got the receipts. I'll show you some really rare photos of how monumental this labor was as she dives deep, not on the great shingle-style buildings of Northeast Harbor, but rather a humble working vernacular architecture of the mid-coast, and celebrates it and valorizes it, makes it new to look old, transport old buildings to serve new purposes. Really fascinating, really rich practice along the way. She's not operating in a vacuum, and some of these case studies might already come to mind. I want to really clearly distinguish what Betsy Wyeth is up to from what Colonial Williamsburg is up to, lower left, Henry Ford's Greenfield Village up top, lower right, and then Electra Havemeyer-Webb's Shelburne Museum at the top. All of these are in the ether. They all precede Betsy Wyeth's effort. We can trace Betsy Wyeth's knowledge of all of the above through the archive. And yet, she sets about doing something rather different. These are great examples of striving after a notion of authenticity, either reconstructing a town whole cloth or transporting buildings to a new context and seeking after isolated authenticity there. There are things in these projects that do directly inspire and impact what Betsy Wyeth is up to, but she is not seeking after authenticity. What you'll see across these projects is something rather more playful, something that is grounded in a historical imagination. We might see a vision of a past that never was, and she brings that elaborate composite together before Andrew Wyeth then remakes that in his own paintings. Another context, and this might be a bit of a stretch, is to compare what Betsy Wyeth was up to across hundreds of acres in 2 states to the contemporary land art or earthwork movement. This too, we are confident she would have been aware of. We have in her lifetime, in the very periods in which she has the audacity to utterly transform an island the scale of Monhegan, she's aware of Robert Smithson's Spiral Jetty. She's aware of Michael Heiser's city out in the Southwest, these macho projects to transform hundreds of acres in some cases into a work of art in 3 dimensions. Not just a boys' club, Nancy Holt and others are engaged in this. We who admire what she did are so bold as to put her in the same sentence as projects like these. Admittedly, they are somewhat different.
Oh, come on.
Cloister, this short-lived German religious denomination, and she Control-C, Control-V, copies and pastes these dormers onto her building, dormers that were never there when she got started. These have nothing to do with the architectural practices of the Religious Society of Friends, the Quakers in Chadsford, Pennsylvania. We see her consciously making a composite of regional material culture associations, picking and choosing from different traditions, even as the whole project is grounded in affection and fascination with the early Euro-American settlers of the Chadsford region. She's making something that never could have existed in one place. So here we are in lovely photos taken by our fellow Mainer, Peter Ralston, who's been a great collaborator who wrote something for the book. Hopefully you can spot those efforted dormers along the way here. You're seeing the finished product, a long way from where we got started. But you're also getting a sense of the self-effacing principle at the heart of this place. She is not giving you any clear evidence that this is a designed and created environment. She is removing herself from the picture. She is removing herself from the story and giving you this created campus of 18th, 19th century associations ready and waiting to be painted. And that is, in her own words, one of the motives of these projects. They are not defined by Andrew Wyeth's paintings, but she does say at one point among her design legacy, if Andy paints it just once, it will have been worth it. We know that's part of what's operating here. Her self-assuredness and self-awareness as somebody who is a maker in her own right grows along the way. And by the time we come to Allen and Benner, there is more of a language of authorship and artistry, and we'll see that developing as we go. Part of what fascinates me about her first major designed environment, Brinton's Mill, is what happens inside the buildings. And this is another kind of key that unlocks what she's up to also in Maine. I'm showing you a photograph by none other than the legendary French photographer Henri Cartier-Bresson standing inside her addition to the house at Brinton's Mill. And then a contemporary photograph down into the mill race as it flows right through the milling building. This is a visual aid to talk about the quixotic extent to which she goes to make this mill capable of grinding again. This is not just a beautified building ready for Peter Ralston's photograph. This is a functional building when she gets finished, and she does not see the project as finished until it is capable of grinding enough grain to bake one loaf of bread. She goes to great lengths. She is studying historic mills of the wider region. She's consulting with experts on hydraulics. She's discussing whether to build her new water wheel out of a modern material like metal rather than wood, does settle on wood, trying to get it right. And for about 2 decades there, before that wooden wheel inevitably rots away again, she has a functional water wheel and water mill capable of grinding. And that engagement with historic industries comes to be a pattern that would repeat. It's not just about making a pretty campus for her husband's work, but rather about a really deep historical fascination with how these places were used and trying to reenact or perform historic industries. That will come again. We have some great evidence of how this place looked right when it finished. And I have to go to this source because of what happened in September 2021 when Hurricane Ida caused a dramatic flood that elevated the Brandywine Creek 21 feet and did significant damage to this property. Happily, the portable furniture was saved. The wonderful caretaker who wrote for our book went into emergency mode, whisked things to high ground, but the buildings were severely impacted. We know from Victor Lisanti's photographs in November of 1964 what this place looked like when Betsy judged the project finished. This is from the magazine Antiques. We're happy to get the news just days ago that they're going to do another feature on this later this year because this periodical, maybe some of you subscribe, was so inspiring to Betsy Wyeth in shaping her playful and creative relationship with American material culture. So we've gone to these photographs by Victor Lisanti, and we start to see another kind of key to her practice. There are these very clean, open interior environments with sparse arrangements of historic objects. Again, the initial impression you get is this is like another Winterthur Museum, another colonial Williamsburg. She is giving us ruthless authenticity and seeking to make this mill, this completed mill campus, something that could have existed circa 1810. The more we dig into it, the more we consult with colleagues who are scholars of historic furniture, our consultant Joshua Lane of the Winterthur Museum, the more we learn the truth is more complicated and more creative and playful. I'm fascinated by spaces like these, where you can't confuse this with colonial Williamsburg anymore. Really bold and really original. We've been calling this sort of design language Yankee minimalism. She's using these stark modern composite marble floors with radiant heat beneath. She could have chosen to collect historic floorboards. She did that in other of her properties. She has a big regional and eventually national network of dealers and finders and fixers who are helping her to find interesting objects for her growing design remit. Here, she goes for something that feels almost like a Chelsea white cube gallery with these really sparse arrangements of objects, not grounded in any specific historic site. We have access to her library. We know she was deeply aware of historic furnishing. She was learning from Winterthur Museum just 18 minutes away from her property, and this is not that. Again, another view inside this building. The mill house, severely fire damaged before she gets started, has no great big open hearth showing there at the left when she gets started. She decides, my classic miller's house needs a big wide open hearth, and she creates one whole cloth from thin air. It is an imaginative, a playful project, and she creates this vision of an imagined past, again, that never was. And finally, maybe the Wyeth that you came to see. If you know anything about this family, this might be the one you know. Andrew Wyeth, the painter who died just in 2009, maybe the most famous member of this multi-generational legacy. We see him responding to this room that has been created by Betsy Wyeth. We have both of these works on view in the Brandywine part of the By Design exhibition, and we'll come into the two main venues shortly. I'm fascinated by this rarely seen tempera at left, which, as you can see from the dimensions, 44 by 47 is pretty imposing. This is, again, we're not claiming that Andrew Wyeth merely painted what he saw. At Christina's World in Cushing, at Sparks in the Mill House, he is remaking what he saw with his own transformative and visionary process. And hopefully you see that here. He is making that austere dining room of the Mill House even more so, stripping away the furniture that we know was present, giving us this very wild, surreal, visionary fireplace there. And perhaps you've already spotted the playful modern touch, the LL Bean boat and tote in the corner, which we know was Betsy Wyeth's knitting bag. So there's a little object portrait of Betsy intruding on the scene. We also have in a mirror the reflection of his iconic watercolor Wolf Moon, a depiction of the Kerner farm in Chadds Ford. And we have the first of our other kinds of contributions by Betsy Wyeth to this story, one of his most important models, one of his most depicted subjects. We have Betsy Wyeth here posing at the heart of the designed environment she has made, her first major created campus of historic associations. We've recreated that space in the galleries at Brandywine, bringing furniture in. You get also a little peek at the left of something I'll show you another image of later. We've done our best to transport the Pennsylvanians to the part of the world that you lucky ducks get to enjoy. We're trying to help the Pennsylvania audience to understand how this practice really explodes when Betsy Wyeth comes to Maine, which she would have said is where she really felt most at home. She goes deep on Pennsylvania as if it's a foreign land. She does her research. She tries to understand its indigenous history, its revolutionary history, its industrial history, and she builds this really beautiful and complicated place as a result of it. But Maine is where her heart lives. A few more of her,
Me too.
the sites that, the paintings that she shaped. Night Sleeper with the mill building at left. Again, an impossible view that doesn't exist from any single spot on the Brinton's Mill property. And I include this one, its distant view of the mill property at the far left as another piece of evidence for how Betsy Wyeth impacted Andrew Wyeth's practice. Our time to get today will be mostly about these three-dimensional environments. There's so much more we could say. There's so much more we do say in the book. Happy to answer further questions later. I want to include this not only as an Andrew Wyeth painting of a site Betsy Wyeth made, but as a painting very directly shaped after the fact by Betsy's intervention. You'll see a date line 2000 to 2007. Something happened here. Something changed here. The original version of this painting included a nude female figure in the tree. Titular dryad or forest sprite. The way we hear the story, holiday season, Betsy is given a scarf some years later and spontaneously drapes it over the picture, covering up the figure in the tree, and this nonverbal dialogue ensues. We have this from someone who was there. The transcript goes something like, huh, 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 and then others are kicked out of the room, and he paints out the figure, and he makes it this black void that leaves a little more to your imagination. So this is one kind of tip of an iceberg moment where we see Betsy Wyeth as Andrew Wyeth's key creative advisor, shaping the worlds around him, shaping the way his paintings met their market, giving them their titles, overseeing their reproduction, and sometimes the one voice he trusted enough to make a change to a painting. There she is again, across a lifetime, decades in between. Maga's daughter there using a family nickname for her mother, and the later portrait Tundra, continually finding new inspiration in this key creative partner. We'll wrap up the Pennsylvania vision of this with our big immersive projection at the heart of the gallery as we try to give visitors the next best thing to being in Maine, the next best thing to getting to travel out to Allen and Benner Islands, to travel out to Southern Island and some of these other less well-known sites. But let's go there. This is a map that we've used down in Pennsylvania to orient people. You may not need this. We are zooming in well south of here on the Muscongas Bay region, this about 5-mile radius that is really dense with associations of this family. You don't need to be able to read these, just trust me when I say each one of the red dots you can hopefully see even from the far back of the room is a really deep well of creative inspiration for Andrew, NC, Henriette Carolyn, and Jamie Wyeth, all these painters of a rich creative dynasty. Allen and Benner Islands are those ones at bottom where we're going to culminate. Southern Island farthest right. There's also a family farm property, the Olson house, which is also shaped by Betsy Wyeth. Much more we could say. Here's what you'll see at the Farnsworth Art Museum today, home to one of the two Wyeth Study Centers. My colleague Francesca Soriano, the curator of that installation, has focused on Southern Island and Allen and Benner Islands in particular through historic material culture, furniture, ceramics, etc., as well as the ephemera. Betsy Wyeth's design drawings, Andrew Wyeth's depictions of what she had wrought. You really have to visit it to experience it. A big chunk of the campus is devoted to this exhibition across the main building and their so-called Wyeth Center converted church at the back of their campus. So lots to see there. My final slide will give you just a quick peek of the really rich response to all of this that Colby College Museum of Art has done as well. So let's dive in. Here's a quick before and after of Southern Island. And I'm coming to the end of my time here and want to make sure we have time for questions. Southern Island, you will not see that building extending there. You will not see windows in the Fog Bell Tower there. And you will see inside those windows in the Fog Bell Tower a really remarkable space where Betsy Wyeth, working with Andrew, made something really theatrical and playful. This on the right is that space. You also see inside the lighthouse keeper's house there. Again, we're getting clean white interiors, not grounded in any specific historic referent, but an imagined past of wide open spaces with austere arrangements of objects. But this is something different. This is specifically an intended recreation of the flagship HMS Victory's stateroom at the Battle of Trafalgar. This is meant to be Lord Nelson's kind of day living quarters on that boat at the battle at which he was famously killed, complete with a cannon that can be pushed out the gun port and fired off when a visitor arrives. Jamie Wyeth still does this to this day. This is at one extreme of what Betsy Wyeth created. She could go full austere, plain white Yankee minimalism. She could go all in on the imagination that's always present in her work and make something that's really theatrical, which then inspires paintings like this one, which Andrew Wyeth considered a self-portrait. He depicts a skeleton in an officer's coat from the War of 1812 and then gives it to Betsy Wyeth as a Christmas present, I think it was, calling it a self-portrait. I guess he was feeling his age just before his 65th birthday there. But let's get to what I keep calling the masterpiece. Again, we're grateful to Peter Ralston for giving us these great images from being boots on the ground when it all happened. Ralston was kind of found in Chadds Ford by Betsy Wyeth and brought to Maine by her. I think he would even say given his first camera by her. And then with Philip Conkling, the legendary co-founders of the Island Institute, brought out to Allen Island to help her to begin making this project. What they found is on the left, so try to hold that in mind. Scrubby secondary growth that has come right up to the shoreline since a 19th century state when we know the island was largely cleared and used for sheep grazing. Betsy Wyeth, you already know, is fascinated with historic industries, and her project will not be complete until she brings sheep back to the islands at no small amount of trouble, putting them in a big dory, dragging them out there, trying to get them up onto dry land even before a wharf is built. It was quite a tricky operation. But she sees that history of sheep grazing, taking advantage of the fact that islands are these natural predator-free enclosures as part of the meaning of her sites, that it wouldn't be satisfactory to her to just make a beautiful private island, but it needed to engage substantively with the history of these sites, with the way they were used in this period that fired her imagination, as well as Andrew Wyeth's.
She was brilliant.
She sets about transforming this island, Allen Island first, and then I'll show you a bit of Benner, back to the way in her imagination it would have been in the 19th century. There's reason to believe this, but you must understand this was a huge operation. She has to clear a significant amount of forest, and this was controversial. She had done the research and knew that it was not old growth. This was recent forest reclamation, and she was set upon a specific period of significance, we would say, in the historic site field, trying to get back to a 19th century moment when the island would have looked different. She has to clear away a significant amount of that secondary growth to make space for this village that, again, from the Monhegan boat line going past out to distant Monhegan, you could be forgiven for thinking has always been that way. What a nice, carefully preserved fisherman's village that must be. We can break down the story of each and every one of these buildings. We have done so in the book. I have highlighted the one here hovering in inset blockhouse that we know to have been an original design of Betsy Wyeth. That's one where we've got the drawings. We know she creates that one out of thin air. And you will be seeing this one. Is my cursor visible on the big screen? No. Let me lean away from the mic for a second. The people online are seeing my cursor. The people in the room just saw my finger pointing at a big white building in the middle of the property, which is a really extreme example of how she transforms these islands. You'll be seeing that shortly. Here's Benner Island before she gets started. Top left, a little fisherman's cottage on the shoreline. Long history on these islands of being used as summer fishing colonies by the Wabanaki, original inhabitants of Maine, and then early Euro-American settlers often setting up summer camps on these islands. So there's a little remainder of that from some former lobstermen before she gets started on Benner Island, just a short swim across a tiny harbor from Allen. So we really think of them as a linked pair. And then a sense of what she created there. And the building at far left in the bottom image is particularly interesting to me. That again is classic engagement with historic vernacular architecture. People's buildings, these ordinary clapboard structures that might risk being overlooked. It's been fascinating to think about her in the context of a historic preservation movement, even as this is created from thin air. This is a vision of a house inspired by those of the Andrew Wyeth model Henry Teal on Teal's Island, famously associated with the late Linda Bean. It calls to mind associations with the Olson house, very similar in form, but 2 stories. You see an asymmetrical dormer piercing through the roofline, one of her signature touches again there. But this building on the right side, you see there's an addition on the right side of the Orr house. That is old and transported out there to piece together into her composite environment. So she's transporting buildings 5 miles out to sea to bring a certain feeling of the past. She's designing new buildings to work with those harmoniously. She's making a place that she hopes will be an inspiring landscape to paint, and it of course also has to function as a useful family home where select guests are welcome, but a very private site until its most recent era. This site is probably the best known of Betsy Wyeth's designs, thanks to this 2-part article, apparently the first time Architectural Digest ever did a 2-parter in, I think it was June and July of 2003. Text by the great writer Paul Theroux, and then photographs by Peter Aaron, legendary architectural photographer. I interviewed Peter Aaron about this experience. He has great stories about going out there once the project was done and living in this landscape and capturing it at its state of completion. There are some great quotes in this article, and I think I can do it from memory. Andrew Wyeth is quoted as saying, people would say of the islands, that looks like an Andrew Wyeth painting. And he would say, I think it looks like a Betsy Wyeth myself. And then famously, one of these very rare instances in which this person who was content to remain behind the scenes for her whole life actually steps out for a moment. She calls these islands in this article titled Betsy's World, My Tempera, associating with that medium that is most associated with Andrew Wyeth, the kind of painting that you might know from Christina's World. So this is a crucial moment where we are sort of given permission to tell her story, a story that we could not have told in her own lifetime. She was so resolutely committed to building this unified Wyeth brand that she saw a broader understanding of the constructedness of these sites as diminishing that brand. It was necessary for her sense of things that these places seemed independently found, discovered by Andrew Wyeth, and she didn't want them to be seen as stage sets. Metaphors of the theater do come up in describing this. I think we can get away from that now, and the painting practice lives on. Nothing is taken away from it to understand more about this partnership behind it. We see some consistent design language throughout these buildings, and this is what you'll see inside the Orr House today. An evocation of a shaker peg rail at left, and still to this day, Betsy's cape there hanging like she just stepped out. Some of these plain white walls with simple earth tones and suggestion of nautical material culture in place of the vaguely Quaker southeastern Pennsylvania material culture that inspired her there. This is that structure on the left side of your screen that was tacked on to the Orr House. I showed you her key building on Benner Island, her vernacular architecture tribute, with an addition that actually was old. This was a former schoolroom. And it has this fascinating story of multiple transports. It is first moved, when no longer needed for school purposes, to a family farm in Cushing, and then transported 5 miles out to sea to be made into a dining room on their home. Sparing no expense, a tremendously complicated thing to do. And then this is the kind of work that results. This is the Tempera Witching Hour, one of Andrew Wyeth's better known paintings, currently on view at the Farnsworth. And we see him again stripping away much of what was in that room to make another kind of composite, another creation, but deeply inspired by what his creative partner had made for him to paint. This is kind of the ultimate statement of how Andrew Wyeth and Betsy Wyeth intersect. And I have just one more slide after this, where as a postscript, I want to show you what's happening at the Colby Museum right now. This is Andrew Wyeth's final tempera, and the subject he chose for it, just months before his death, was the sail loft on Allen Island, the building that was transported in pieces 5 miles out to sea by Betsy Wyeth to be reconstructed as a gallery of Andrew Wyeth paintings on this remote island. I think about that Werner Herzog movie, Fitzcarraldo, transporting a steamship through the jungle. This was a monumental labor, even as she's contouring and shaping this island and making ponds where there were none to encourage migratory birds to stop over, creating points of interest and association throughout the landscape, shaping views that you experience phenomenologically as you move through the environment. This is the ultimate example of the lengths she went to transform this place. You can see it clearly again from those public ferryways. It's become a kind of metonym for Betsy's presence on the islands. And there Andrew Wyeth concurs, and he paints this tempera called Goodbye in this moving gesture depicting that monumental labor of his essential creative partner. Now, last but not least, there's been a really beautiful engagement with these sites with our partners at the Colby College Museum of Art. You will see a few Andrew Wyeth watercolors on the far right. We did include from the Wyeth Foundation collection some of the original works of art that were inspired by this place in the Wyeth era. But what's been really inspiring and exciting for the art historians to see is what happens when living artists are invited to do a residency on Allen and Benner Island, when they're equipped with all the research assistance and information they might want to understand this person who shaped this place. And they've each made new work that engages with Betsy James Wyeth's legacy. You're seeing the ceramic work of Linda Nguyen Lopez, who is a professor at the University of Arkansas there. She is a ceramicist who here was inspired by very small ceramic shards that Betsy Wyeth found on the islands, traces of their earlier inhabitants, and she makes them monumental, remakes them in her own ceramic practice in tribute to Betsy's engagement with the ceramic history of those islands. You will see, I think I don't actually have in this shot, the photographs of Mandy Lamb, who is based in Maine, a really fascinating artist who was finding these little ephemeral traces of a kind of a ghostly presence, and she was making these almost spirit images on the island. She would find these little flashes of blue hitting her camera lens, and she kind of moved throughout the Allen and Benner interior and exterior environment in search of that sense of the missing presence of Betsy James Wyeth herself. This is the work of Claire Pentecost, who is a professor emerita at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. She did some fascinating work engaged with the soil chemistry of Allen Island, and she was trying to understand literal layers in the land, and she ended up making this beautiful textile work, a tapestry basically, that reimagines what she found, the deep root structures and chemical substance of the earth below. And not to play favorites, but I was especially inspired by the work of Elaine Ng here, who went really deep on that history that so fascinates me of reenacting historic industrial uses of place, and went deep on the sheep grazing history of the islands, the historic sheep paths that are still palpable in the landscape. And she made these, again, beautiful textile works with embroidery evoking those sheep paths through the landscape in that patchwork thing on the wall there, and the case in front of it is other little traces of her research-based practice as she visited Allen and Benner Island. So there concludes my time. There's so much more that we could say. I'd be very happy to answer any questions. But in short, I hope that you will come and visit this exhibition, at least at its main venues in Rockland and Waterville. And if any of you are passing through Greater Philadelphia before the beginning of the next year, we'd love to welcome you to the Brandywine Museum as well. And I can't remember if I mentioned, we're delighted that this whole package will travel to the Telfair Museums in Savannah, Georgia in the fall of 27. Please check out the book and please come see what we're up to in By Design, The Worlds of Betsy James Wyeth. Thanks. Any questions I can help with in the room or online? There's one back there. So the question was, for those online, how many projects total was Betsy involved in, and how were the finances handled? Or to put it even more bluntly, this is the elephant in the room question. Where did the money come from? Who is paying for all this? It's an essential question. I've given you the big three. These are certainly the major projects. If you'll forgive a quick skim, let me go back to that big three slide right up front. These are the big ones that I would really want you all to understand. Brinton's Mill, Southern Island, Allen and Benner Islands, but they are not the only ones. To answer your question, she does design her first independent work of architecture for Broad Cove Farm in Cushing, which is still a very private family property, so it's a little difficult for us to include it in this exhibition. And then she's involved with a number of other historic preservation efforts in Maine and in Pennsylvania. The Olson House is a complicated one, pre-existing building, but she's the one who envisions it as a public historic site and plays a key role in preserving its patina. She has a vision for what it should look like, not as a perfectly modernized and updated house, but kept just the way it was. So we do give her some credit there. Where did the money come from is, again, from her own labors overseeing, metaphorically, Andrew Wyeth Industries, and she is the brain trust. Andrew Wyeth has the privilege to be able to focus on painting, while Betsy Wyeth, when she's not shaping these remarkable places, is overseeing a tremendously lucrative rights and reproduction enterprise, prints of his work, and overseeing investments across the country. So she was a really savvy businesswoman, born in a period in which the circumstances were not aligned for her to be the main character in this kind of power couple, but this is not about inherited wealth or anything. They are fortunate, that rare story, not a Vincent van Gogh story, getting to enjoy the fruits of their labors in their own lifetime and able to create on this scale for that reason. Any others in the room? Yes. Well, I guess there always have been some. The question is, when do we get to a key moment of things being truly locked down? I can't speak to the historic conservation law of Mid-Coast Maine. We do know that she got some pushback from the Port Clyde municipality when she was doing some pretty serious clearing on Allen Island that raised some eyebrows. I don't know how projects like these would be approached today, but she was deeply embedded in the conservation industry, as it were, in Pennsylvania. She's a big part of the founding of the Brandywine Conservancy, which is the parent organization of the Brandywine Museum. So even as she is doing these transformative labors, she's working on preserving a kind of a view shed in the larger area, ensuring that a hard hat factory doesn't tear down another mill nearby. And that conservancy that she helps to kick off is now preserving more than 70,000 acres in that region. Yeah, so it's a fair point. Maybe not all of this would be permitted today, so close to the shoreline, but I think a lot of what she was up to was also grounded in a really respectful relationship with the idea of the working waterfront. I didn't even get into that. We talked about bringing sheep back to the islands, but one more of her industrial engagements was welcoming working watermen to Allen and Benner for trap storage, so they didn't have to use fuel going back and forth to the mainland. And there's also some really fascinating experimental salmon farming that was happening out there. So she was trying to be fully incorporated into the local economy, even as she had a fairly heavy hand, I think it's fair to say, in transforming. Yeah. Yeah. She's a big part of the creation of the Island Institute. The people who co-found the Island Institute are doing that dramatic work. So she had a pretty good seal of approval for taking a fairly heavy hand in some of these transformations. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, it's fundamental, and we have again her library that shows how fascinated she was by this in both Pennsylvania and in Maine. One of the essays in our book is from Arthur Spies, the leading Maine state historical archaeologist, who was brought out to Allen and Benner Islands in dialogue with our friend, the great Maine state historian Earl Shuttleworth, to do it the right way, not just randomly go sifting for arrowheads, but to really try to understand the shell middens that were present out there, the native history of this place. Inevitably, she's a product of her time, and there's a kind of a romantic understanding of this indigenous past rather than engaging directly with the indigenous present. However, there is one fascinating story that came up over lunch today of the great Wabanaki artist and canoe maker David Moses Bridges coming out to, I think it was on Benner, where he made a new, really beautiful birch bark canoe for the Wyeths, again, reenacting that historic industry. Yeah. Any others here? Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I did not cover it, and it is one of the topics of the big book and the exhibition. So if that interests you, we've got a lot to say about it. It begins with a really interesting father. Merle James was a painter, and so long before Andrew Wyeth is a glimmer in her eye, she is having a fascinating creative upbringing. We include Merle James paintings at the Farnsworth and at the Brandywine. He's universally referred to as a Sunday painter, this kind of amateur term of derision, but he's not too shabby. He's a pretty interesting painter. Moreover, he was the art director of the Roycroft Arts and Crafts Colony in East Aurora, New York. She's growing up in an intentional community of anti-industrial makers who are feeling out of step with mass production in the early 20th century and are going back to making really beautifully designed and printed books in the old way. Metalwork, leatherwork, and indeed painting as a part of this. So that's where it began. She's growing up in walking distance of the heart of that colony. We hear stories that she had big dreams of studying archaeology at the University of Chicago, and all that is set aside in the way of her time when she marries Andrew Wyeth, but continues to bring that historical fascination and a really serious research enterprise to all that she makes. Yes. Absolutely. I'm able to, so the question here, I'm trying to remember to repeat these for the folks online. Did Andrew Wyeth always take Betsy Wyeth's counsel? How did that particular crux of their creative partnership work in practice? I've cited one exceptional incident where we had witnesses present, and we've got the oral histories. We know about the transformation of Dryad, a really rare occasion where people saw Betsy Wyeth's powerful advisory relationship unfolding. It mostly happened behind the scenes, and we can't always document how she impacted the appearance of a painting. And of course, this project would be a failure if you came away from it thinking that Andrew Wyeth didn't really do much at all. That's not the point of this. There's another big ego here too. Both of these people are forces of nature, and there are that, maybe I'll do another little quick skim to Maga's daughter. That one on the left was famously made after one of not a small number of marital tiffs, and you see a little bit of high color in her cheeks. Apparently the argument screeched to a halt. He said, "I have to paint you just like that." They clearly did not always agree. We understand how these things can happen, but if anybody had this unique American artist here, it was Betsy Wyeth. Yeah. Yes. How do they meet? And it goes back to Merle James in contrast to Mount Desert Island with its centuries of Euro-American art history and Abenaki history before that. Muscongas Bay, this working waterfront region, did not have a whole lot of art history when the Wyeth set up shop there. So N.C. Wyeth gets a family home in Port Clyde not long after Andrew Wyeth is born. It's big news when we hear that there's some Sunday painter on the next peninsula, Cushing, named M.D. James, Merle D. James. Andrew Wyeth goes a long drive up one peninsula and down the next one in search of what he believes to be a medical doctor, Dr. James, M.D. And instead of finding M.D. James there, he finds his rather attractive daughter, and one thing leads to another. There is a story, and it is the sort of story that my boss down at the Brandywine really has held my feet to the fire about because it sounds too good to be true. We've done the research, and we really believe we can back it up. There's a preponderance of evidence that it really was the very first day they met. Betsy Wyeth took Andrew Wyeth to the Olson house, that famous subject of Christina's World and so many more, hundreds and hundreds of paintings in a variety of media, introduced him to Christina and Alvaro Olson, introduced him to one of these key case studies of great Maine vernacular architecture. And again, one thing led to another. There's this kind of key test for Andrew Wyeth. How will he respond to this place? Does it speak to you as it already did to Betsy Wyeth? There too, she was there first before Christina's World was a glint in Andrew Wyeth's eye. Any others? All right. Thanks very much for your time.